It's actually just that I've gained a bit of weight, but for some reason on me it looks like muscle, even when it's not. So people have been saying to me, have you been working out? And it's like, no, I'm just fat now.
Are you one of those people that are blessed with like a chunky, a dad bod that looks ripped, but like...
yeah, a bit.
It's like... It's not matte, or like flussel, or something like that, where you can cross flab and muscle over together.
Yeah, it's a bit like that, as if you didn't have enough reason to hate me as it was.
Boo. Well, on the old pandemic train, actually, I'd lost a fair chunk of weight initially on the pandemic front, and in the last 2 weeks, because I've been comfort eating, I've put it all back on again to make sure my aerodynamics are bang on for the Silverstone Grand Prix that we are about to undertake on the Failcast F1 podcast. Segue. Hello everyone, welcome to that. We were just discussing how basically our lives have failed recently in all kinds of ways. At least my tits act as good ballast though. Can weigh them about wherever I need for good downforce. My name is Simon, and alongside me as always is the Definitely Zero. How you doing?
Excellent. I'm just giving the double finger guns like a game show host to camera there. Who says all these years of practice haven't paid off in my hosting skills? I'm doing good. It's been crazy sunny the last 2 days here. It's like 29 degrees outside. But I've had to work all day. So that has made me particularly miserable and complaining, as if that wasn't bad enough. I'm out of Red Bull, so I've reverted to a huge bottle of Effect, which is Germany's very forgettable generic Red Bull substitute.
Oh, okay. It sounds like... some kind of like discount aftershave as well.
Yeah.
Like a Lynx.
It actually says on the label, high quality energy drink, as if it's trying to make a point. With extract from 5 vitamins. That means potentially 5 vitamins. It doesn't guarantee them. I like the choice of language. Not recommended for children or pregnant women. So always a good sign that you're drinking the right thing. It's quite refreshing though, to be fair.
It should get you pumped for a pole position.
We had such a good race last time.
We did.
The pressure's on for me now. You actually beat me across the line, but I took the win because of a penalty, and we're very, very close in the championship. You're 1 point behind Lewis for P2.
Oh. Whereas you are champ leader, sir.
Yeah, it's unfamiliar territory. It's a little unsettling. Now, since we were last on, also many things have happened, including 2 Grand Prix. And as I said at the outset, there's going to be a lot of whinging in this episode. I feel I've got a lot to whinge about.
Yes.
Mainly because after, what is it now, 14, 15 months of living and working in the same 3 rooms 24 hours a day, I've just had fucking enough. Work's been stressing me out as well. So what better way to release the tension than like any number of domestic abusers throughout the generations is to come home and take it out on you guys. And something I want to kick off with is we've
literally,
had...
I hope.
Kick your head off.
All right, Yuki.
There's something I want to kick off with is I've been... Oh, what's the weather doing first before I go on my rant? Oh, that's good.
Just like how you're going into the argument.
Exactly. No time to prepare today. No time to be gentle. So what I want to discuss is how pretty unimpressed I've been with most of the grid since the start of the season. And that's a weird thing to say, given that everybody's so close, or that has been less so over the last 2 Grand Prix. Like, I'm more impressed with the teams than I am with the drivers. So, why am I being held in the garage? Is this for you?
No, I've just seen you go out.
No,
now you're going out again.
Oh, we have connection issues because you came out ahead of me and then now you're behind me.
Back where I belong.
Yeah, that's right. Yield.
Hey, Buzzy Bear.
So here's my complaint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every Grand Prix this season has had a prolonged period of safety car within the first 10 laps.
Yes, I have a theory on this.
All of the drivers are continually either picking up penalty points or risking a black and white flag, or the most common one, breaking track limits. These are supposed to be the 20 best drivers in the world, which, let's be honest, it's really the 19 best drivers in the world plus Nikita Mazepin, who just sort of happens to be there. Yeah. So why is it happening all the time? And why, in a season where everything seems like it should be so close and so exciting, and all the teams have really stepped up? Like, I mean, even Haas, right? Like, I have to give credit where it's due. Haas are extracting something from that piece of crap because, they did an overtake on purpose. So all the teams are firing on all cylinders. The gap in qualifying, aside from Nikita Mazepin, is ridiculously tiny. Mm-hmm. The race pace for most teams looks good. It yo-yos a bit, but it's a relatively small incremental difference that can make a huge translated difference in terms of race or qualifying position. So, it's a pretty spicy enchilada, but the drivers they all seem to be dropping the ball, with some honourable exceptions. Obviously, Lewis and Max are pretty much on it. Up until... Well, I'd still say Lance Stroll actually has impressed me over the course of the year, and those are words I never thought I'd have to put into a sentence together. And Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. And George Russell would be on that list if it wasn't for his meltdown, and I don't know, he's been a bit more mercurial than we're used to. He was very nearly out-qualified by Latifi at one point. He lost out to Mick Schumacher on track, clean overtake, so he's not been as on the boil as we're perhaps used to seeing him. And I'm just curious why all these drivers can't just string it together, and why everyone's so up and down.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I've got a couple of theories. I will touch on the safety car one first. This is the first time that a safety car has been sponsored.
Yes. You're brundling me now, aren't you?
Yep, and he said it himself, actually. He was saying, I expect we'll see the safety car out at really, more than usual, because it's now got brandness to it. And I also think as well, because of... especially when we're going to tracks where we're less... kind of grade A-ing sometimes with the Imola and the Portimaos. You've got marshals that are relatively well stocked in knowing what they're doing, but it's just that facilities mean that you have to kind of go a bit further and go up a hill and actually deal with the world that's around it, and I think that kind of contributes a little bit. What I will say though is that the length of the safety cars is really starting to annoy me, and this isn't just in Formula 1, this is across the board elsewhere, because some of the support races that I've seen, the European Formula 3 Renault series that's replaced, that's the old name, whatever it's called now.
It's Formula something by Alpine, isn't it?
That's it. That's the one.
I don't think Formula something is actually the name. And also, hello, Wodge. Very, very pleased to see you, mate. Glad you could join us. Please continue.
No problem. That had like a couple of minor crashes. Out comes a safety car, both at Imola and wherever else it was that they were at as well, possibly Portimao. But it was like a good quarter of the race was behind the safety car. And I'm thinking, no. This didn't used to be like that. And it just seems like everything's got slower and worse. And it's starting to make me think, oh, come on, let's BTCC this and stick the extra laps on at the end up to like a percentage amount where you could like regain some of the racing action back. Not that it would change very much of the actual results. But that's why I think the safety car comes out a lot. And then your talk on track limits, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and I think is as a result of the fact that the field is so tight, and because you can't really push the cars much more, drivers are feeling like they now have to push the edges of the track more to gain the advantage, and that's where they're starting to slip up and cause problems and so on and so forth, because actually machine-wise you're at your limit now, and I think that's what causes some of the inventive driving that goes on, and I'm absolutely not a fan of it, and I'm going to continue on my soapbox, apologies for this monologue, but it needs proper clarity that doesn't change from race to race and corner to corner. It needs to be the white line, just regardless of everywhere, and having some wheels within it. That is all I want, and it just to be standard everywhere. We don't have this in e-racing, because the track is just like, no, lol, penalty, and it will delete your lap. We don't have any of this faffing and going, oh, well, it's not really an advantage there because they're running wide. Sod it. No. That you have painted that track. It is in that format. If you're running wide, that's because you need to set up your car or drive a bit better, or actually consider like the overall lap time and change your approach to that corner. It really frustrates me, and I do think it makes F1 drivers and F1 as a whole look slightly amateurish because of the whole, what was it in Imola? It was like 60 something laps got deleted over the weekend, and you think, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's just not good enough, and I'm totally with you on this, by the way. I don't know if viewers agree, but you know, because particularly if people are impassioned fans of Max Verstappen, you're not really a fan of track limits at the moment. I know Helmut Marko has already come out and said it's a stupid rule, but you know, he likes to, when he's not busy lining up junior drivers against the wall and shooting them in the back of the head like old Yeller, he does like to throw his toys out of the pram. So, you know, I'm not surprised to hear that from him. Weirdly, Gunther Steiner was also making the same point, but I mean, you know, even if they extend the track limits as much as he may want, Nikita Mazepin's still going to be in the barrier, so I don't think it's really going to save him that much money.
They need to put him in like an airfield and just leave him on his own.
I believe that we should have airbags on all the barriers.
Hulk smash!
But you know, and the most egregious thing as well is not even just the track limits, which I agree with you wholeheartedly on, by the way. There's a line, stay within the line. You're supposed to be the best fucking drivers in the world. It's not difficult. Mm-hmm. Drive within the limits of the circuit. And the marshals and the stewards need to remain steadfast. And it should be an automatic equal treatment for all drivers.
Yep.
I don't know, I said this in the last podcast, and it's a bit conspiracy theory-ish, I know, but I've been getting a real stench of corruption off the sport this year. and a bit of last year, but like in a way that makes me think of Jean-Marie Balestre.
Oh, okay.
Or you know, Sepp Blatter, or Satan. There's just like, I don't know. Because generally I've always been of the opinion that F1 is not the place for conspiracy theories. Because there's too much money involved. So when people used to say, oh, they're sabotaging so-and-so's car, what was it? They were saying that they sabotaged Hamilton's car for Rosberg to win the title and so on. It's like, oh yeah, no, there's way too much money in play in the Constructors' Championship for you to be pissing about like that. Teams just wouldn't do it. However, I'm surprised at how little attention the reality that the power unit regulations were leaked to Mercedes 2 years before they were implemented.
Yes, absolutely.
And nobody seems to fucking care. And I watched a video from Aidan Millwood the other day, and I'm going to let him off because he's sick, right? So I'm guessing maybe it's interfering with his brain. But he's like, well, it's a conspiracy theory if you think that's the reason that they've won. It's like, well, no, it's not. It's a demonstrable 2 years of foresight that enables you to develop your power unit 2 years ahead of launch.
Especially when you combine that with, we've done some Pirelli testing for them as well.
Yes.
I mean, how many ways can you stick your oar in so that you can get advance notice of the competition? Because, like, you can't unlearn any of that knowledge once you've got it. That's why they keep on putting people on gardening leave for so long in the sport. So, yeah, if you've got 2 years advantage over something, I can't see how that can't be an advantage, but also an advantage that you can't quantify in a nice, tidy nutshell.
And, you know, I mean, he said other things in that episode, actually. I urge people to go watch it, because he was saying that anyone who believes that he defends Bottas because Bottas is a pushover is an idiot. And I was like, no, I'm sorry, Aidan, no. I'm sorry, no, not at all. The evidence is overwhelming. The way he's sabotaged George Russell's career to keep him out of that car. Yeah, I'm sorry, there's something iffy about the whole thing. And the fact that the sport is so busy pointing out, well, we have the driver with the greatest track record in history on the grid, rather than pointing out that the team that's delivered it for him has essentially cheated and gotten away with it, I think is quite telling. Anyway, I totally derailed myself there, because what I really wanted to talk about was the sudden appearance of multiple black and white flags, with Yuki Tsunoda being shown one 2 weeks ago, Lando Norris getting one for a move that was beneath him, as far as I'm concerned, into turn 1, I think it was. Yeah, it was on the end of the start-finish straight, wasn't it, where he moved over in the braking zone.
Oh, I must have napped at this point. If this was in Spain, I was basically comatose. Yeah. Yeah, and it's... Again, I think this just comes back to mentality of junior series, how much more... how less respectful drivers seem to be of each other, I think. Kind of not year on year, but kind of generation on generation, because everything is deemed to be safe, and therefore, and that is partly because of track limits, and partly because of the lack of gravel traps, and all of this kind of sanitizing of the sport. So therefore, people just lack the respect, and then they chop each other off. And then it's not until you have a Grosjean being exploded everywhere that you kind of go, oh God, yeah, we were lucky, and didn't we all realise it, that we've gotten away with all of this for so long. But a driver's brain is so programmed to then just chop everyone off at the next race anyway, that it's such a short-lived shock, which then makes some of that kind of rhetoric around it quite shallow and a bit meh.
It is a bit hollow, isn't it? Wodge makes some great points. That he believes that Liberty Media are always going to lean on the side of spectacle, which I think you and I would both agree upon. And Definitely. He asks, since when has receiving a 10-second penalty been something you can serve at your leisure in a pit stop rather than within 3 laps? Excellent point. Didn't pick up on that in the race. Yeah,
because... and same with Gasly on this race as well. I also really lament the whole... and I've said this for a while, when a safety car comes out, people getting their lap back. This isn't NASCAR.
I hate that.
really pisses me off. Preston in the chat here says Bottas isn't a pushover, he's getting pushed aside by the team, just like in Russia. And Sam says, although Lando is a good start to the season, with Ricciardo being 3 up on quali against him, do we now think we'll start to see Ricciardo take over the team, I think is what that's trying to say. Yeah.
That's two very good points. Now, to address the first one, you and I have long been quite outspoken defenders of Bottas. We were both fans of his during his Williams stint. I by no means think Valtteri's a bad driver, but he is having a pretty bad season. I was quite proud of him for defying team orders this weekend, although I'd have to say he's not in the strongest position to get away with it.
No. No, it seemed like the wrong time to start arguing when the press seems to be obsessed with him being dropped mid-season. And I don't know why, because all of the evidence is that if you want to get into a Mercedes, the only way to do it is to quite literally endanger someone's life. Right? Billy Monger, big crash, lost his legs. He spends 2 years hanging around at Mercedes. Paul di Resta commits career suicide and somehow still manages to end up around there. How is he a reserve driver still as well? It's like I'm waiting for Pedro de la Rosa to pop out and go, "Hey guys, remember me?"
Oh, don't
out
fucking
comes
tempt him.
Barrichello. Oh.
Don't tempt either of those guys. Who else? Romain Grosjean, his magnum opus, the crash he spent his entire career building up to slowly, nearly kills himself in a fire. He gets in the Mercedes test. And then George Russell gets in there, but only when Lewis Hamilton contracts a potentially fatal lung infection. So the idea that Bottas can be easily removed is one that is quite fanciful, I think.
He is the Bottasinator.
Yeah.
He will not die. He will not stop until someone gets that Mercedes seat.
Oh, yeah, and also, who else have we got? Esteban Gutierrez and Stoffel Van Dorn, as Wodge just points out. Both of those guys committed career harry-carry as well. So
that is true.
So really, like the portents are not good. Up until this year, I would say Bottas has largely done good enough, and I think harmony in the team has value. But this year, that car is not where they need it to be, in the same way that Red Bull are having that problem, and that's when Valtteri needs to worry.
Yeah.
And the one thing I did agree with Aidan Millwood on, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, mate, is that there's no shame in not being as good as Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Remove those two drivers from the equation, and Valtteri Bottas could very well be championship leader right now. He could very easily be a multiple-time world champion, based on his years at Mercedes. But unfortunately, just like Eddie Irvine, he happened to mature into his career at the same time as one of the all-time greats.
Yeah. And I completely agree. And I know this was something we'll probably touch on later on, is the fact that Hamilton and Verstappen in that championship battle have kind of elevated themselves into like this god tier, which then makes everyone else battling for positions 3 backwards to almost all seem to pale slightly in significance, because they keep driving each other away. And we saw this with to maybe a lesser extent with Hamilton and Vettel 2017-ish. But you go back to some of the great inter-team rivalries and you'll start to see people one team really push away, and it would be like 2 out front and then they'd be like a pit stop ahead and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just think if Bottas is staying within a couple of attempts, there is no reason to change because of the harmony in the team, which is why it's a bit weird if he starts going, I'm going... to who would make son porridge you, because then that's his trump card gone. And so you start to think, well, if you're not going to be harmonious in the team and we're starting to pull ourselves towards a Hamilton-Rosberg situation, which I don't think it will ever be that way.
No.
Then you just think, well, sod it, let's get Ocon or Russell in instead, because they're the other 2 murky drivers, or Mercedes drivers could be murky. Depends on how you view them, but depends on which bush you find them in late at night. But if you upset the apple cart, that's a problem. The only other kind of situation that they have is that they've had those two for such a long time. I don't know where they are on like the all-time list alongside, say, a Berger and a Lacey type. But at what point do you start to say we need to now look to the future? But I don't think it's Bottas that you chuck out, because it's Hamilton that calls the shots and makes the decisions, and they will fall in line. So long as he doesn't push the monetary value so high that Daimler then go no.
Well, I mean, Daimler already did, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think the other thing to think about here, as Bottas, is by being the team player and securing your seat. Like, if he was still putting the car second, occasionally third, he was still doing the job, and he wasn't having difficult season he is, plus the disobeying team orders, which I kind of support, but bad timing. Mm-hmm. I would argue the case that it's far more likely that he keeps his seat and Lewis is the one that goes. Because that very nearly happened this year. I mean, very, very nearly. Toto Wolff was the one who really fought for that.
Yeah.
Because as far as Daimler were concerned, George Russell is 1/40th of the price.
Mm-hmm.
And the time he was in the car, delivered superbly. The team let him down. And, no matter how good Lewis is, and I'm quite prepared to concede he possibly is the greatest of all time. Certainly the record books will reflect that at the moment. But is he $44 million a year worthwhile?
In a pandemic and a global crisis.
In a pandemic where, there's a cost cap and all kinds of limitations, sponsors are not as freely available as they were. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of hard to make that economic case. And, that might be a hot take for some, but it's not as hot as the spicy take we were discussing earlier about Red Bull. Because that's the other team where there's sort of a disparity between teammates right now. Now, the thing is, I think we would agree, and I hope chat agrees here, that Perez, I think, has done quite well. Because all the drivers who have switched teams for this year are really struggling, with the possible exception of Carlos Sainz. And I think, Checo has certainly been more on it than either Albon or Gasly were able to be.
Yeah.
And we know that Checo is a proven quantity. And I think it's a further sign that Red Bull has been developed on such a knife edge and so much with Max in mind that it becomes very, very hard for other drivers to drive it.
Yep.
And then I'm left wondering, actually, would the team be in a better place in the constructors if the team was Checo and somebody else? Which I know some people are immediately going to go, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but I mean, hear me out. Red Bull know how to build a car.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Max drives his cars right on the ragged edge. He's not what I would necessarily call a... Well, I don't know if this is true anymore, actually, because I would previously say he wasn't a particularly controlled driver, but in terms of smoothness and staying calm, but he's definitely matured and he's showing the racecraft these days. And I was very impressed with his acceptance of being second at the last Grand Prix, actually, because that was the kind of attitude I wanted to see from him all along.
Mm-hmm.
He even smiled in the post-race interview. He was like, well, we did the best that we could, but I couldn't keep him behind me. Like, so what? He can stand there and say, I did my absolute best. We couldn't play the strategy the same way that Mercedes could because Checo wasn't in play, and my tyres went off, and we didn't have the luxury of an extra pit stop.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would, no one's going to fault him for that, right? I don't think it diminishes the Max Verstappen brand.
No, not at all. It makes him more likeable, to be honest.
Yeah. So, you've got two teams here that have the same problem to varying degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Which is there's a driver in each of them that has become so much the heart and soul of the team.
Christ.
and is actually the only one able to get the peak out of the car. I think, we've seen the evidence for Red Bull that actually that car is not particularly friendly towards Verstappen's teammates, no matter who they are. With Mercedes, though, I think there is more of a case that maybe if you did replace Bottas, at the expense of team harmony, you may find the constructors a bit more of a solid footing there, which I thought this year would be more of a worry than it's proven to be. Like at the start of the season, the first 2 rounds, with Red Bull looking like they were genuinely the top team, which I don't think is the case any longer.
No.
That's when I would have also been really worried about, well, do we have the right person in the car alongside Lewis? Because, make no mistake, it's the Constructors' Championship that the teams and the sponsors give a shit about. The Drivers' Championship is the one that gets all the press coverage, but all the money is the Constructors'.
Yeah, and then you use the drivers for the marketing to boost the money, blah, 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 blah. It is fascinating because I think, actually, it's not Perez that necessarily comes out of this looking bad. I think it's Red Bull that start to come out of this looking bad, and it's more around... and the race did actually a really interesting video that came out today that was terribly titled, may I add, around how McLaren are having to treat Daniel Ricciardo like a new a rookie in Formula One to get him to re-understand how to adapt his driving style to the McLaren. And Perez is kind of saying that he's having to do something similar at Red Bull as well. But instead of working together necessarily as a team, I don't really get to see or understand how Red Bull are supporting Perez, because he's treated like... Well, he's outside of the driver academy program for a starter. You've got Helmut Marko chomping at the bit, waiting for his next piece of driver meat dinner. And it just seems like a really unsupportive environment. Even though I actually quite like Christian Horner and think that he probably gives a relatively okayish vibe from himself. I just think it's the nature of Red Bull's beast and how they kind of find themselves in.
The thing is, I agree with you there, because Horner, I think, really stood up for Alex Albon.
Yeah.
And I think he'll do the same for Checo. And I think it was probably him that pushed to get Checo into the seat, because we know that Helmut Marko was not happy about the idea of taking someone from outside the Red Bull driver program. And Dietrich Mateschitz had even threatened to pull the plug on the young driver program if they were forced to go elsewhere. Now, The thing is, what I would do is say, get rid of Helmut Marko. he's at retirement age, and look what he's done. Look at the drivers that he's cast aside. Jean-Eric Vergne, multiple-time Formula E world champion. Sebastian Buemi. Then you've got what's his fucking name? Carlos Sainz. One of my favourite drivers, and I forgot his name there very briefly, right? Pretty much every team that's let him go must be kicking themselves right now. Can you imagine how well McLaren would be doing if that partnership had extended into another year? I think he left at the perfect time for Lando Norris, because Lando really learned from that partnership, and I believe it was absolutely instrumental into him becoming the driver he's become.
Yeah.
And it was time for Carlos to move on, or Lando, so that he could come out of Carlos's shadow. So in a way, it's good. But, if you're playing the constructors only game, it would have been good to keep them together. And I think Red Bull, if they had Carlos and Verstappen in the main team now, I think they'd be in a much stronger position. And I don't say that to diminish Checo. I just think you would have had another driver who's been through the exact same cars as Verstappen and was already able to drive them on a comparable level when they were in equal machinery.
Yeah, I just quickly did dive down into the chat. Apologies, I've been missing the chat, but Sam Mellows popped in there. Verstappen at Red Bull reminds me of when Schumacher was at Benetton. And that's true. You had all of those drivers, Brundle, Leto, Verstappen, funny enough, Herbert, all of them top tier drivers doing very good work, loving your work. But again, it's built around a single team. You could say that also was the same relatively at Ferrari as well for Irvine and Barrichello. But I think it was even more pronounced at Benetton because there would often be like 1.5 seconds between like one and the other. Obviously, we don't get that these days, but yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's not been something that you see all that often, actually, unless like a driver is really not there on merit. So, you know, it's very glaring when it does happen. And they've kind of written themselves into a corner a little bit. I don't know who they'd put in that car if they got rid of Checo, because they've already decided that Pierre Gasly is dead to them.
Yeah.
And Gasly seems to have decided that Red Bull are dead to him as well, because he's been very critical of them in the press lately. You've got Yuki Tsunoda, who's next on my list to talk about, but he's effing and jeffing into the radio and accusing the team of sabotaging him because he can't qualify very well. They're really scraping the barrel. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, now they have a very costly engine development program to take over.
And they're hiring literally anyone that they can from Mercedes, left, right, and centre to try and front some of it. Sorry, I was about to go into barriers and I just saved it.
Well, I once hired a Mercedes rental car on holiday once, and I got a job offer from Red Bull. It's, I mean, but it's understandable, right? And both Toto Wolff and Christian Horner have said, "Well, what else were we going to do?"
Yeah,
I think ultimately, though, I hope that Checo is given at least one more season, because I think he's the best of the available options.
I think he's there for a while. I don't see him being. I don't see there being anyone else coming up. Tsunoda, I think, has already shown that he's a no. And I was slightly worried about him coming into F1 in general. If Gasly's already dead to them as well, then they have no other options, I don't think, because no one... And I think it starts to become the poisoned chalice that other people will be like, well, no, that's career suicide now, thank you, because this is now the first, like, truly known quantity who's gone across and is like, you what, mate? And when was... I know people were, like, critical of Perez when he was at McLaren in 2013... Pace-wise, wasn't an issue. It was more about he kept on crashing into Button all the time instead, and so that wasn't a like quote-unquote pace problem. So
no, it was it was it was a Verstappen problem. He was hot-headed. He was eager to prove himself, and he didn't pursue racecraft. He just pursued speed, and that McLaren move came too early for him.
Yeah.
And the whole thing now is that the rumour is that there are several teams interested in securing Pierre Gasly at the termination of his contract.
Someone's put Mazepin in the chat. Please no.
Well, at a certain point, maybe Christian Horner just drops his hands to his side and goes, "Yeah, fuck it, why not? I mean, we've tried everyone else."
What's Russian for Red Bull? Could rename AlphaTauri when their clothesline doesn't quite work.
Right, I've been an AlphaTauri customer for 6 years. That's how old the brand is. I have a lot of AlphaTauri clothes. Don't buy them.
Oh, hot take.
No, don't buy them. They look great, but they don't last more than like 3 washes. It's shit. And the clothes get holes in them. My belt fell apart. It's like, it's the veneer of quality, but it's not quality. Anyway, sorry, tangent. Wodge has some comments in the chat for us, pointing out how good the AlphaTauri looks in practice but never really delivers, and also, do we think that Gasly to Alpine after Alonso retires? Yes, I mean that's the rumour in the paddock, right? That Alpine's the team that are most pressing for Gasly.
Yeah.
And actually, Gasly and Ocon, even though I know they're probably not the best of mates, an all-French lineup at Alpine. Yeah, I'm in for that. Because, Alonso has demonstrated exactly what I said we would.
Yeah, he's been a bit mercurial. I know he said that he's not quite up to 100% fitness, and I guess having his cycling accident may have also kind of put the dampeners on some of his training a bit as well, obviously. But yeah, Ocon is actually apart. I wasn't impressed with him at Bahrain necessarily because I was like, oh no, Alonso's come straight in and he's just got out of his wheelchair and is like, lol, see ya. But then after that, actually Ocon has raised his game and has started to show the kind of form that I was hoping that he would have shown a bit more last year against Ricciardo. And it's that's his team to command if he wants it. But if he doesn't, Gasly is there as the French backup if he can't quite master the challenge, and having an all-French lineup with a French team, and it's blue. I'm getting Ligier 1990s vibes getting on. All we need is Alain Prost's front wing nose cone on there, or his actual nose as well.
It's both of our favourite liveries of the year, is it not?
Yep.
And it's spoiler alert, it's the team we want to drive for next season.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to stay out an extra lap because I'm being particularly friendly to my tyres for some reason.
I do not have the pace.
And I'm happy on the softs. I'm very happy on the softs. Okay, so getting things back on track, because we keep bouncing around on tangents, that's what we do here, but I do want to talk about Yuki Tsunoda and AlphaTauri as a whole, because the gospel according to Will Buxton is still that AlphaTauri are potentially the third fastest team and that their car is fantastic. But we have seen very limited evidence of that so far. They had a great test. They, as Wodge said, looked very good in practice, but then they just continually disappoint. And I was actually very excited about how Yuki Tsunoda started the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, honestly, he necessarily has a pace problem, certainly not over a single lap.
No.
He doesn't have an aggression problem in terms of his driving. If anything, it's an over-aggression issue.
Yeah.
But as we talked about in the last podcast, Helmut Marko has already labelled him arrogant, which is, a bit pot calling the kettle black, but, he's old, we'll let him get away with it. Still, though, he, after qualifying in Portimao, he made the claim very publicly that AlphaTauri have given a better car to Pierre Gasly, apropos of nothing. And there seems to be no evidence that he is running a inferior spec to... Oh, Norris is out. I wonder if we get a safety car.
No, because it was just behind me. Because I was about to pit myself and I didn't. Oh.
So, as we know from Pastor Maldonado, for example, accusing the team of screwing you does not tend to pan out very, very well. Because, AlphaTauri, whatever you want to call them, they're one of the hardest working teams out there. With a very solid reputation for building strong cars on a tiny budget, and in one sense, I would agree with Will Buxton. I think it's a very tidy package. I just think they've delivered it in a season where it's not going to deliver the performance uplift it might have done in other years.
Yeah,
because everything's just so tight. I agree. The AlphaTauri is a very, very clever design. It's a very fast car. It's fantastic. But it's just not fantastic enough. Now, I am wondering if we will see excel at one or two tracks over the course of the year, but at the moment I'm struggling to see where that might be. Though I'm kind of getting the feeling we might see more from Gasly, at least at Monaco.
Yeah, it feels like one of those cars that you can kind of wrestle around a bit, I guess.
And I think its livery this year is much better than the years before.
Yes, indeed. And I agree. I think
tried to make a move there and it didn't work, and I've lost half my wing.
Ouch. Everyone's on to mediums. Oh, Bottas is a whole pit stop ahead of me. This has not worked well. This.
Go, go, go. You'll be
There we go. Oh, Albon literally inside me. If we've got... sorry to dive back on. So Sonoda, Jesus Christ, calm it down, mate. It's rare to see something so dramatic, I guess, from someone. No Giovinazzi. Oh, maybe yes then. It's rare to see someone being so aggressive with so little to show for it. Like talking wise, it's the equivalent of, like, funny enough, because he's just right ahead of me, Latifi saying, I can't believe that Williams haven't allowed me to score my first debut points yet. Everything has been absolutely terrible. I don't believe that I'm getting fair treatment from Mr. Sunday and all of that kind of stuff. You wouldn't do it, especially when you've been comprehensively trounced by your teammate, and also just no. And it's not a way.
Let us not forget, also by Lance Stroll.
Yes.
Although, his stock is rising because he is embarrassing Vettel a little bit.
Yeah, and we need to get onto that, because that's one of the questions that I just quickly spotted in the chat when I was in the pit stop. Is how long do we think Vettel will last? And it's interesting because, so for me, from Sonoda's perspective, you can only give that fighting talk when you've actually given the performance that means that you can back it up. So it's come arse about face, and this also kind of stems back to working relationships and how you can grow with a team. And so, remember we were talking about how Mick Schumacher's engineer and Mick have like a really good relationship, and they're learning and they're working together, and it's in harmony. And you can still already see that starting to get benefits as he continues to make Mazepin look like a monkey and actually kind of hang on the coattails of the rest of the field. If when you've got Tsunoda, then qualifying and going out in Q1, crashing in qualifying at Imola, and then going, oh, your fucking car, and going absolutely apeshit at everyone and saying about how the world is not like him. He has a haircut that makes me feel like he's one step away from being a swap-in for Papa Roach and Linkin Park as well, which doesn't help me when I listen to him moaning, because I just think, oh no, so we've got a cutter. It's that can't do anything for a working relationship. And so all that does to me is just hand more of the team over to Gasly, who then becomes even more the de facto team leader. And it makes Tsunoda's position, I think, beyond 2022, if he is still about, and is still doing the same kind of thing, very untenable.
Completely agree. I have some other things to add, but how about we get on to Aston Martin with the question from chat?
Yeah,
because we do love you guys. We don't want to neglect you like the awful gay dads that we are. So it's an excellent question, right? I mean, I think Vettel has had a small upswing at Portimao, but it has required Lance to take a step backwards a little bit. I think we can agree that it's really been more of a case of Lance outperforming the car rather than Vettel underperforming, because I don't think that car is very good.
No.
And the world's favourite dentist, Colin Coles, who did, of course, used to manage that team back when it was Midland and Spiker, he has said that he's spoken to engineers at the team, and they say they are not happy cowering beneath the iron fist of Big Daddy Stroll.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the story is this. They pride themselves on innovation, of being a constructor in their own right and taking a small budget and building a car that outperforms the budget. And they've got a very good track record of it. Mm-hmm. Big Daddy Stroll arrives and says, I want you to build a copy of the Mercedes.
Yes.
This means as engineers, they're no longer designing anything, they're copying, and that's not going to be very fulfilling for your job. But here's the interesting thing. The concept of the Racing Point machinery was high rake, like the Red Bull.
Yeah.
And he made them switch to a copy of a low rake car, and now they're complaining about the low rake regulations. And of course now they're stuck with this concept because there's a token limit, you can't just change the car back to their own design. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. Now, the one impressive thing about that team, apart from the very stylish new look they have, I do like that racing green. I think the pink accent looks good, and I like the team wear very much, although it's ridiculously overpriced.
Yep.
Is I think it's shown that people who have been especially critical of Lance Stroll and who believe he's purely there because of his dad's money, and I won't deny it's a contributory factor, but Lance Stroll is a solid driver and always has been.
Yep.
You know, back when he was debuting and everyone was saying that Williams need to get rid of him, we were already saying, look at his junior Formula E record. The kid's got something. Probably not World Championship contending material, but, you know, a safe pair of hands. And, you know, given my stance has increasingly become that the age of the star driver is coming to an end, and that it's more important now for teams to focus on having two similarly competent drivers rather than building around one star driver and trusting that that's enough. The characters like Lance Stroll, like Marcus Ericsson, like you know, Nico Hulkenberg, those are the drivers that I think are going to start boosting in value. And I think actually there's going to be some very interesting driver moves going into next season with the learnings that this season is providing. For example, like the Alfa Romeo lineup, the only reason Mick Schumacher isn't in that car is because Antonio Giovinazzi being there was instrumental in the 1-year extension of the Alfa Romeo deal. I think there's a very good chance that that team goes back to being Sauber next year, and then I don't know how long Mick's locked in at Haas, but I'd expect Kimi to step back, and then you've got 2 open seats, which is not a good way to begin a formula change. And suddenly I think the reliable, safe hands drivers are going to become a lot more attractive, and I do wonder if we see a Nico Hulkenberg come back again. That is, if he doesn't dethrone Sebastian Vettel at some point.
Yeah, now that he's been announced as a reserve there as well. Vettel is this continued dip of form. I wasn't surprised that he's been in strife here at Aston Martin. I didn't think that... I think it's formula related rather than actual like Ferrari related. I think Ferrari like would have wanted to... wouldn't have wanted to, but being at Ferrari and seeing all of that kind of fall apart will have ruined all of his kind of mental will to want to continue on and do a fantastic job, and it must be very demoralising going into a job where you knew it was out and all of that kind of stuff. So completely get and understand all of that. The main thing for me though is that fundamentally nothing changes until 2022 anyway, so it kind of makes
race.
I can see the switching of positions on my...
Oh, bastard, he's knocked me round.
No. Controversial.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to win this race because he's now fucked off into the sunset because the wing damage I picked up was costing me too much speed in the corners, and I'm annoyed now because I didn't need to get that wing damage. I made a stupid mistake and I had the pace to just walk away with this race.
Boo.
But, you know, second will do.
No fun.
Wodge says I knocked myself. Well, I mean, I had nowhere to go. I braked as hard as I could, but I really had nowhere to go.
Disgusting. Boo. And I think nowhere to go is exactly where Vettel will be if he doesn't buck up his game by the end of the season, because I don't think that the whole reason why he's there is because he's supposed to be World Championship material and providing all of this extra insight and stuff like that. Yet what are we seeing? A team that is languishing in the midfield. I just find it really odd that you've got Alonso, Vettel, Raikkonen all squabbling over like 14th. And it's the kind of thing that I was used to do in old F1 games where you had TV mode and I'd do reverse grids and just loll at it for a little while. And it's great to have that quality and depth of field, but it does start to make you think, well, what are you all doing? With 20 seats on the grid, I'm starting to get a little bit precious about some of those 20 seats and thinking that actually if you are no longer running at your World Championship material level, you don't get to ask for millions and come out and just drive for fun at 80% of what you used to be able to do. Come and give the opportunity to some younger guns. And I didn't used to be like that, and it's listening to you that's made me be like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I mean, I really struggle to see what Kimi Raikkonen is bringing to Alfa Romeo at this point.
And it makes it very difficult for me to then understand what Giovinazzi then brings as well. Because I think actually Giovinazzi has been quietly going okay, actually, this season, especially because he's been getting into Q2, generally outperforming Kimi, and then having bad luck at all times. And there's something for me about Sauber and, Alfa Romeo, having some real operational issues that other teams just aren't having, and you just kind of go, well, why on earth is this a thing? Things like where they'd get disqualified at Hockenheim for stupid regulations. You just think, well, how on earth did they manage to do that? And then like Kimi being like given penalties at Baku for weird pit box infringements, and then getting a punctured tyre immediately out of the box. You kind of think, how? What's going on? And they're the only team that comes up with this weird and wonderful things, and it just feels a little bit misguided amateur hour, as if the chilled out factor of Raikkonen kind of seeps through to some of the actual management decisions and causes a bit of lackadaisicalness.
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't understand why they signed him again for this year. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Kimi, we all love Kimi. Yeah. But his best years are definitely behind him, and is he the right fit for that team at this moment? And I would argue no. Wodge asks, is Giovinazzi better or is Kimi just getting worse?
And that's why we can't tell. That's the problem.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. It's hard to say. Especially
when you've then got the reserve driver is Mr. One-Handed Cowboy. And I love Kubica because that is superb what he is doing, and all hats off to him. And I think he was probably shown up a little bit at Williams because of that car being an absolute bitch. And so with the Alfa Romeo being much more tidy, he's a bit more on the pace when he's keeping it out of the gravel, lol, Spain. But again, it's another old hand who isn't quite at where he used to be. And so I would expect Giovinazzi to be ahead of him. And then I'm like, well, what on earth do I benchmark him against now? Because it's just beating grandpas.
I mean, I do wonder if, given Haas's dire financial situation, which is hardly a secret, do you think there's some pressure somewhere to have a Raikkonen-Schumacher lineup at that team?
Yes.
For, like, press things, and then Raikkonen will retire?
Yes. Agree. Absolutely agree. It's one of those... I don't think Raikkonen gives a shit. I don't think Schumacher necessarily gives a shit, really, either. But... well, maybe Mick will give a little bit more of a shit because he can play he was my idol card. But yeah, I think that is marketing gold, and that will provide enough kind of entertainment and sponsorship perhaps for what is a flagging Alfa Romeo brand that is not shifting cars.
No, and is moving to Formula E.
Yeah, and actually maybe does Raikkonen go over to Formula E?
Well, I think that'd be a good place for him to go. I just don't think he should be in F1 anymore. And honestly, I feel the same way about Alonso. I know a lot of people are happy to see him back. I know Wodge is happy to see him back, but the problem is with these drivers like Raikkonen, like Kubica, like Vettel. I mean, the thing is, I'm curious to see if Vettel kind of recovers when the formula changes next year, because I agree with you. I think it's formula specific. I think he just struggles to handle this specification of Formula One, rather than, he's really dropped off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
But there comes a point where you're just undoing your legacy.
Yeah.
And the abiding memory people have of you is of you pootling around at the back, being beaten by a much younger, unknown quantity.
Which was why I was always a bit like, for the first, especially 2010 with Schumacher when he returned, because I was thinking, this isn't quite going at the same level as what I was hoping. There were flashes of greatness in 2012, and actually I think he was kind of a bit unfairly criticised because he was doing quite well in that year, apart from some mechanical issues and stuff like that, and he had the kind of faux final pole position and all of that stuff, and actually he got there eventually, but it showed that actually I think there was two levels of that to me. One, it showed that Schumacher actually was just human, albeit or was reduced to being only human, if that makes sense, as opposed to being like a god of the sport. And then similarly also that over time what makes you become that Herculean driver is now vastly different as we go into an era of technology, and instead of it being about feel, it's about micromanagement and data, rather than, dare I say, quote unquote natural talent. And actually what makes a great driver in 2021 is not what makes a great driver in 1994.
No, it's not. I couldn't agree with you more. Wodge rather controversially says he believes Schumacher shouldn't have retired when Ferrari tried to push him into retirement. I don't know if I agree with you there, because mean, being an active fan at that time, I remember I was fucking sick of him. No, I mean, not that I didn't respect him, but it was just, it was his time. It was his time. It was a good time to bow out.
It was a nice bow on the end of an era, which made a lot of sense, I think.
Because, wherever he would have gone, I mean, not that I think many doors were actually open for him. It would be a short tenure at best that was probably unlikely to deliver any success. So, let people's memory of you be of you at the top of your game. Sorry, just to finish my point.
Yeah, go for it.
If Vettel retired tomorrow, my abiding memory of him is not going to be those years he was amazing at Toro Rosso and Red Bull. My image in my mind of him when people bring him up is going to be him backwards in a gravel trap in a Ferrari driving into oncoming traffic. Just like my memory of Kubica. I mean, I still remember how his qualifying laps used to electrify me, but my most recent memory of him is in that terrible Williams being shown up by a teenager. And Alonso has become so dull that he's not even on my radar. I don't have any memories of Alonso really after the start of the McLaren Honda era.
He's a really fascinating case in point, actually, because I know he's been in F1, but I think for maybe anyone that's watched F1 in the last few years, they'll be completely oblivious to his stature beforehand, and now it's become he's meme radio, and that's what he brings to the sport, not necessarily thoughts of glories of old, rather than actually providing that on-track battle and action. And I was hoping that at least if he was in a top-tier Alpine midfield car, he'd start to be able to bring that back in again. And we'd be reminded of his skill and speed and prowess. But I also don't really yearn to be reminded because I have those memories of beforehand. And if it's not going to be... I'm not going to sit there and be like, wow, that amazing drive in his Alpine to 7th, where he overtook all of those drivers from the back of the grid was absolutely stunning. Yes, I'm going to be sitting there reeling off Imola 2005 and all of those kind of iconic drives from then, and like the drama of him versus Hamilton in 07, for example. And so, yeah, it pales into significance.
I mean, that was the thing I respected about Webber. He knew when to step back.
Yeah.
He could have gone on for a few more years, but as he said, I held my own against Seb as best as I could, but I could see that it wasn't going to go my way.
Yep.
And there's no shame in walking away when he did. I just think these drivers do themselves more harm than good by sticking around, and they do the sport more harm because. Like you say, I don't think these names bring the value that they once did. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much of the sports audience at the moment are newcomers who are coming from Drive to Survive. And as you say, they're not going to have a fucking idea who Fernando Alonso is, necessarily.
No.
And given that Alpine have actually been delivering some pretty significant steps forward, I think it's hard not to be disappointed. However, I believe there is a performance clause in Alonso's contract that would allow them to get rid of him at the end of this year if he doesn't start delivering.
Interesting.
Because he's been paid a lot of money. And when Cyril signed him, that was the thing in the... Because, it was a question, why are they bringing him back? Mm-hmm. And, why spend all that money? And Cyril had said, well, if he doesn't deliver, he won't be kept. And I know we're only 5 rounds in, but he has not delivered.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is interesting. I was just going to say, back on that Schumacher thing, if you, in your alternative world, and Schumacher had to leave Ferrari but didn't retire in 2006, where would you have stuck him in 2007?
Oh, fucking hell. Well, I mean, let's think about what the driver market was like back then. Isn't that the year Super Aguri joined the grid?
That was 06. But they were there with Sato and Davidson.
Yeah. And Toyota were on the grid. And Spiker.
Yeah, that was Sutil's debut.
Yeah. We had Sauber.
That had become BMW.
Yeah, there's fucking nowhere really, because who were the championship contenders at that time?
Ferrari and
McLaren, right?
Yeah.
It was like a 2-horse race.
Yeah. I was going to say, if Kubica hadn't existed because he'd only done the one race that year, he could have gone back to his BMW days and joined the BMW Sauber team alongside Nick Heidfeld for an all-German lineup. That would be the only place that I would have
wasn't 07 the year they fired Villeneuve? Or was that 06?
It was 06, but Kubica was still an unknown quantity apart from his fun podium. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Wodge suggests McLaren or Renault, but this was when Alonso was at the height. I think BMW Sauber was the only place that made any sense, but it would have kept Robert Kubica out of a race seat.
I suppose you could have gone for Renault's actually a good sound, because that would have been the year that Heikki Kovalainen debuted, and he wasn't very good that year, was he? He could have been a missed opportunity.
But I remember being really hyped for him. And I remember speaking to you about Heikki Kovalainen back then, because his was a name that I'd heard circulating for like 2-3 years before, and everyone was saying he's going to be the next big thing. And everyone firmly believed that up until he started turning a wheel. So would you have put an aging Schumacher in instead of a guy that you think is going to be the next big thing? I mean, it's not like we don't make mistakes, you know. Jackie Stewart once said that Jan Magnussen is the next Ayrton Senna. He genuinely did. He genuinely did. Well, I'm a bit annoyed at myself there. I could have won that race if I hadn't have been a twat and damaged my own front wing. But, you know, a lot of this podcast wouldn't be what it is if I wasn't a twat. So,
Swings and
we take the rough with the smooth.
But I was glad with the fourth in the end. I was a bit worried that I was going to lose it to the Red Bulls. But that was cool. Quick fire round of questions, because there was quite a few that came in on my chat and I wasn't able to watch because I was busy trying to keep Verstappen behind me all the way through. Do we think Aston Martin will get rid of Vettel at the end of this year? I'm going to say no, but I reckon they will at the end of 2022.
It's a good question, because there is a little bit of brand damage, I think, to be had if they get rid of him at the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Personally, if he carries on like this, I was Daddy Stroll, I would get rid of him, because you're just allowing the driver market, when it's very liquid, to solidify without you getting first pick.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's a lot of contracts up at the end of this year, a lot.
I agree.
And there's a lot of interesting options, both on the grid and on the sidelines. That I don't know if Vettel carries on like the rest of the year the way he has, then I would get rid of him. Will Aston Martin actually pull the trigger? I think probably not.
Do we think Russell would jump straight into a Mercedes, or would they join? He go further up the grid before joining a Mercedes?
I think personally, I think the seat at Mercedes is his.
Agree.
He's the anointed one.
Anointed.
He just has to avoid pissing off Toto.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wodge. Pleasure as always, mate. It was lovely that you could join us. But I don't know what you make of that, Simon. Whether
no, I agree.
But I think he's already done too many years at Williams. Really.
I think that the third one's one too many personally, and I, in my head, I would have been like move him up the Mercedes ladder, but then obviously that kind of went when it became Aston Martin, so that makes it slightly difficult for them. And then the last quickfire question that we've got, although I completely agree with Sam's comment in the chat here around, we think lower midfield backmarker teams should be made up of consistent, reliable drivers and young talent. Alonso and Raikkonen have had nightmares since they were teammates in 2014, and I don't basically the implication is old people going back down the grid but staying on is not necessarily where they should be, and I completely concur with that. Yes. Do you guys think that Ricciardo will be in McLaren next year? I say yes, 100%. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I would too. Zach Brown loves him. So far, while relations between him and Lando are not as good as they were with Carlos, they do seem to be getting along okay, and both drivers have put the team first, demonstrably on track. Mm-hmm. So last weekend, Lando let Danny Rick through, and the week before it was the other way round.
Yeah.
And I think Ricciardo will come good, and I think his decision at Renault will be fresh in his mind, right? Because there's an argument to be made that if he'd stayed on, things would have maybe turned out all right. I mean, the Alpine is starting to look better and better, and right after he announced he was moving to McLaren, suddenly Renault became a viable contender for that place in the Constructors' Championship, if you remember.
Yeah. It's interesting because it feels like either of those decisions could work in his favour because of how on a knife edge they were, even though McLaren was looking like the good proposition at the time. And it's going to be a really interesting, I think, development race. And how much of that is carrying from 2021 over to 22 with the new regulations, I think will be huge, because if Alpine are spending a lot of time this year upgrading this car, they're not thinking of next year. So, be interesting.
Dassie comments, Ricardo is pulling an Alonso with his team moves. I couldn't agree more. He has had that sort of look, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't give McLaren the kiss of death. Was that all our quickfire questions?
That was. The other ones were just comments about actually agreeing with what you were saying, Ben, around people talking about Alonso, Schumacher, Raikkonen, and about how amazing the mid-noughties were, and actually now those two kicking around towards the back views them in a different light, because it's not the battle for the lead anymore, but it's still the same people, and so they view their whole kind of career in a slightly different light because they're now making up the numbers rather than being at the front of the field, which is just interesting.
Absolument. So the championship standings, you've somehow managed to go backwards.
Yeah, but it's got ahead of me, annoyingly.
And in the constructors, we are still on top. Wajas, when's the new F1 game coming out, and when are you playing that one? I believe, is it June or July?
July.
Yeah, July 24th is the date officially, but you can access it 3 days earlier if you're allergic to your own money.
Which I am not going to be doing.
Yeah. And yeah, as Dazzy, I'm sorry if I get your name wrong, has added, the game's not complete on launch, so it's actually going to be missing some of the tracks, which I think is a bit...
I think it's abysmal.
Money grabby. But the interesting thing is, Simon and I have been talking about a change of format, because it's been a few years that we've been having the comments that combining a podcast and sim racing at the same time means you kind of compromise both. So we have been toying with the idea of doing an actual audio podcast where we do the F1 discussion, and then because Simon is on Twitch now, and please do go watch him on Twitch. YouTube is no longer big enough to contain him, the rampant beast that he is. That actually long form stream content works really well potentially with the new cooperative career mode, and that would allow us to be teammates and or rivals, and to move between teams and develop cars and all that interesting stuff. And nothing's decided yet. We still have to talk about things, but as always, your guys' feedback is absolutely invaluable. Usually we do get the game on launch, don't we, Si?
Yeah, normally.
So, on or around July 24th, we will definitely be picking up. The aim now is to try and figure out how we can finish this season before the new game drops, because we've kind of been screwed by Codemasters bringing it forward. And then we'll talk more away from the stream about how we're going to approach streaming next season. And yeah, please feel free to share your feedback. Other than that, thank you so much to everyone who has taken time to come and join us, to watch our ineptitude and join in with the conversation, the highbrow conversation that we have. Failcast F1 team co-op career then, very potentially. Well, yes. Deniz always fits in. That's a key question. Where does Pedro Deniz fit into this? Maybe we'll call the team Deniz GP. With the Deniz dollars.
Yes.
Oh, if only. But yes, please all do take very good care of yourselves. Thank you so much for the high quality conversation this evening. It's been fun, hasn't it? We like getting questions and having a bit of a chat. We do. We had several people in chatting away in the chats on both here and on Twitch, so really appreciate it, and thank you so much for keeping with us. 10 years strong and still plodding along, a bit like Vettel's career. Okay, well, then we will see you in a little under 2 weeks' time. Until then, please do all take good care of yourselves and your loved ones, and stay out of trouble, no knifing policemen or whatever. And all that remains is, mwah, mwah. See you at movie night, darling. Mwah. Bye.